This week, May, finally, unbelievably, ends in June. Welcome to the Soapbox.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And
why don't you resign?
This gentleman screaming, belligerent and angry at Theresa May after local elections in which the Tories lost over 1,300 seats, getting squashed, crushed. In the words of Obama, taking a shellacking. Theresa May stood there and had to take that level of abuse from that gentleman who was angry and belligerent that Theresa May remains as the prime minister. Incomprehensibly, unbelievably, somehow, Theresa May, this Energizer bunny of a premiership, has remained in power. But that comes to an end in June. The 1922 committee had a stern conversation, as they call it, with one Miss Theresa May. And in that stern conversation, they got across to her that you need to leave and you need to set your arrangements for when you leave. Now, Theresa May didn't necessarily like this, and it was kind of clear that there was some pushback on this, but ultimately, the Prime Minister, Theresa May, the Energizer Bunny, the prime ministership that through rain, hail, sleet, snow, nuclear apocalypse, she continued to move forward stubbornly, shockingly. It's coming to an end. Now, there are a few things, a few consequences of this. The conversations that were taking place in this notion of some kind of coming to some agreement, working with labor. Now, I would argue that this was a sham to begin with. Now, why do I call this a sham to begin with? Because people can get into this notion of negotiations, but set standards that the other party can in no way exceed to. In the case of Theresa May, the standards that were set, it was very clear that the Tory party wasn't going to exceed to those standards. One of those standards was the potential for a second referendum. Now, the moment that this standard for a second referendum comes into play, you have a problem. It was the Tory party that allowed the Brexit referendum to take place in the first place. And if the Tory party that allowed this Brexit negotiation to take place or referendum to take place ignores the referendum by having a secondary referendum, that gets to be somewhat problematic within this process. This was shot down from the get-go. Meaning they understood that this was not going to be something that the Tory party was ever going to accede to, meaning that the negotiations were always going to be subject to fail. Now, from a political standpoint, Labour has to play it this way. Labour has no want for the Tory government to implement their own Tory Brexit, but they also don't want to give them any wins. Meaning they don't want Theresa May to get a win with her deal. And so they have no compulsion at all. No incentive to assist her. By the same token, they can't necessarily look so craven that they're willing to crash the country itself in order to try to take power. Oh, it's politics. I love it. I love it. Now, we find out a few things. Just to give a heads up. Theresa May is going to drag that broken, crushed withdrawal bill that at this point has been dragged through the mud, the slop, and is tattered and torn and has pages missing and so forth, and is going to bring that for a vote for a fourth time. This bill was voted down in historic numbers the first time around, and she was able to get a few people on for the second time, and then at one point she even split the bill apart and still voted down. Burkow made the point of saying this bill is not going to come back because the government is not going to just continuously put its bill up over and over and over and over and over again under this notion that you're going to force them to comply. She's tried it all. She's threatened. She's cajoled. She's even used Jeremy Corbyn as a weapon to try to attack her own party, to try to get them to support the bill. None of it worked. She's offered her head. Even that didn't work. They still ended up taking her head, but no, they didn't take the withdrawal bill. For a fourth time, they're going to bring that bill back. Now, when it became extraordinarily clear that Theresa May wasn't going to be able to maintain a premiership, this notion of having a conversation on some kind of Brexit negotiation became rather pointless. The next leader of the Tories may want to go in a different direction. And some of the people who they have vying for this are hardcore Brexiteers. So, the conversations or the talks between Labour and Tories break apart. Each side blames the other. Jeremy Corbyn essentially said the government was shambolic, the government was disintegrating as we were talking to whoever we were talking to. But in all honesty, the government wasn't willing to necessarily move on their red lines, even though they wanted to try to bring Labour in to try to share some of the blame because the Tory party was sharing this alone. So understand what's taking place. The Prime Minister says, we need to have talks. Why? Because she was owning all of this on her own. The Tories were owning this all on their own. Even though they said that the Labour Party and the Tory Party was being beat in the local elections, Labour only lost 100 seats. Tory lost 1,300 seats. The Brexit Party, in the European elections, it doesn't even look like the Tory Party exists. And even, these guys are supposed to be a major party. They are being punished viciously for not implementing the referendum. And the Brexiteer party is eating their lunch. Yes, they're angry and belligerent at Theresa May because they believe that she, to some degree, ruined the party and that they can't go forward as long as she's the Prime Minister. That bill is going to be voted down again for a fourth time. And at that point, it would be overwhelming. She would have to give when she's leaving. Here's the last point. Who's going to exceed her? This goofball, the Trump, but a more competent Trump, given him being fair to Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson had the opportunity to try to run for the premiership last time, and he decided not to do it. And not just decided not to do it, in a somewhat of a surprising way decided not to do it, and left people out hanging because they assumed that he was going to do it. Now, mind you, he was one of the king Brexiteers. And the king Brexiteer, when given the opportunity to take power and initiate the Brexit process that the public voted for, he declined. In which case, Theresa May took power. She had one objective. And we can, at this point, say she failed that objective. But assume for the moment that somebody like Boris Johnson takes power. Then what? Is Boris Johnson going to get another deal? The EU says the deal that you got is the deal that you got. Is Boris Johnson going to be able to negotiate another deal? Here's one more interesting part. What if you do have elections? Meaning, what if Labour gets what it wants? And what if Labour forces a general election because they can't come to some consensus on what they're going to do in regards to Brexit? And what if, let's be wild and fanciful, let's whisper in a dream and say Jeremy Corbyn takes power. Jeremy Corbyn has said that no deal is off the table. He's been pretty strident on that, actually. He's even attacked Theresa May on that point. No deal is off the table. If no deal is off the table, and the European Union has said, the deal that you got is the deal that you got. We're not changing it. Why can't they just say, the deal that Theresa May has agreed upon is the deal that you got? And they look at Jeremy Corbyn and slide across the table the exact same deal that Theresa May had, and they tell him, we're not making any concessions or changes or tweaks. This is what you got. You're stuck with it. Now, what are you going to do? You're going to walk out the door when you said that no Brexit is not an option? No deal? Or are you going to accept the deal that Theresa May had, which you also said wasn't an option? Which no option do you want to accept? This is the argument structure that Jeremy Corbyn has stuck himself into because he himself has said no deal is off the table. How on earth do you take no deal off the table in the middle of a negotiation? Are you willing to accept any and everything that the European Union gives you? If not, then no deal has to be off the table just by the virtue of the negotiation in and of itself. Some of this stuff was political posturing. So don't misunderstand me. I'm just pointing at that political posturing having certain repercussions to it if Jeremy Corbyn were to take power. Big time politics in Britain, man. I'll end this here. I don't want to keep this one too long. And I just wanted to give an overview without going over ground that we've already gone over before. There's several people vying for the nomination of the Prime Minister. Essentially, they take Theresa May's seat. They didn't want to have something that took place with Thatcher, where essentially the knives came out and you're just like, drag her body away and somebody else take her spot. They didn't want that to take place. They wanted this to be somewhat of an orderly, dignified fashion. even though you've had somewhat of a feeding frenzy and everybody else has known about it, and they've called this woman everything from a zombie to a headless horseman. I guess that's my phrase. I'm saying headless horseman, but you get my point. Theresa May, Energizer Bunny, Prime Minister, losing her batteries. May finally ends in June, whether her withdrawal bill goes through or not. And we're going to see another Prime Minister, and we're going to see that Prime Minister, probably a Brexiteer, try to push this in further, more of a direction of Brexit. Whether that works or not, we're going to find out. There is no desire in the Parliament for a no-deal Brexit, regardless of who's the Prime Minister. So they may change Prime Ministers, but the problems are nevertheless going to remain. Pay attention to Britain, man. It is fascinating politics. And by the way, what's taking place in Brexit gives context to what is taking place in China and the United States. And I know it's an odd segue, but it does. When you're looking at the trade negotiations between the United States and China, you're getting this similar dynamic of countries, or countries versus unions, but trying to work out items that are in their best interests and using whatever mechanism at their disposal to try to get some level of advantage of that, whether that's from an optic standpoint in media or in the negotiations itself. Not to mention the internal politics of the countries as they do this. For example, the way China is becoming more nationalistic in saying, look, America is attacking us, we need to buy more products. The United States is doing something of the same, but there's a difference. The United States is essentially went with this notion of the lowest price. That's not a nationalistic issue. That's more of, I need to keep more money in my pocket. Wages, real wages, have gone down under Trump. Look it up in the last payment thing. Richard Wolff, thanks a lot for tweeting that out. People need to save money. They're going to buy at Walmart. They're going to buy as cheap as they can find. But nevertheless, negotiations are fascinating. The politics is fascinating. The internal dynamics of Europe, or London, of the UK, meaning as they deal with this. Not to mention the internal dynamics of the EU as they look at Europe, as they look at the UK flounder and fall apart. A government is literally collapsing under the weight of Brexit. The second one, both of which, Tory governments. Cameron, who collapsed at the birth of Brexit, and Theresa May, who's now collapsing, I guess you can say 3 years out. I'll end this here. If you guys enjoy the content, please consider supporting through PayPal or Patreon. Thanks all. And by the way, if you like the content, please consider liking and sharing or subscribing. Thanks all.